الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على سيدنا ونبينا أبي القاسم محمد وعلى أهل بيته الطيبين الطاهرين. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah. I wanted to begin first and foremost by thanking you for extending this invitation, and it's truly an honor and a pleasure to be here amongst you for the following 10 nights, inshallah. For the coming 2 nights, the topic that I wanted to go over, inshallah, is the topic of why is it that we commemorate the month of Muharram? Why is it that we commemorate the events of Karbala? I remember when I was in the holy city of Qom, one of the unique things about the month of Muharram is that you could really feel and you could see the month as it was about to begin. I remember usually in the street that we lived in, one of the houses would begin maybe a week, 2 weeks before the holy month had begun. And they would begin by putting black banners, just like you see on the walls here. They would begin by putting those black banners up, and soon enough, another house. They would also put their banners, and a third house, and a fourth house, and a fifth house. And before you knew it, the entirety of the whole city of Qom, and this is the same for all of the cities that she has lived in, it was covered in black. And it was something that really you could see it, but you could also feel it in the air. As the month was about to begin, it was palpable. Now, what was amazing is that I would notice other changes as well. And maybe you see these changes even within the communities of Dearborn, other larger cities, that people who were not as religious, sometimes I would go from the city of Qom, I would go to, for example, the city of Tehran. Tehran is not known to be as religious of a city as Qom is. It just isn't. It's a larger city, is more cosmopolitan, and the number of religious people is going to be naturally less. And I remember normal weeks when I would go and sometimes I would need to get the taxi cab. The taxi would be playing, for example, haram music, and we would go about our way. But as soon as the month of Muharram was about to begin, and as soon as the month would begin, those same individuals that were comfortable playing that haram music, in honor of Abu Abdullah, they would turn off that music and they would switch Musiba and Latmiya and these kinds of things. Even the hearts of someone who maybe throughout the other 10 months of the year, 11 months of the year, he's not that religious, she's not that religious, but during that 1 month, they feel ashamed in front of Abu Abdullah al-Hussein. They say that we can't do what we were doing. We can't be who we were. Let us at least change some of these things for this month. And it would go even deeper that they've done studies that people that were criminals, people that their livelihood was stealing and maybe smuggling and these kinds of things, that was how they made their livelihood. Even these individuals, when the month of Muharram comes, something changes. And they feel ashamed that even if we are stealing the other 11 or other 10 months of the year, then at least for the month of Muharram, in honor of Imam Hussein, I'm going to stop. And you could see the statistics, crime actually comes down during these holy months. Now, this isn't surprising when we look at Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa alihi. Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. In a well-known hadith, this is decades before Karbala is even to happen. Rasulullah, he turns to his companions and he says, "Inna liqatl al-Husayn hararatun fi qulub al-mu'mineen lan tabruda abada." He says that verily in the martyrdom of Imam Hussein, a fire has been created in the hearts of the believers that cannot be extinguished. And we see even in those that may not be as religious during the ordinary months of the year, even for those individuals, it creates a heat, it creates a fire, and this fire pushes them towards Allah. Now, when we look at these commemorations and these gatherings that we're having, and that all throughout the world, if you look throughout the entirety of the Muslim world, they are having these same commemorations. One of the things that is very clear in history is that the Khulafa, from the very beginning up until today, they have done their best to either divert or to stop these commemorations from happening. When they would see people gathering, the Shias of Ali Muhammad were gathering, and they were mourning, and they were crying, and they were weeping, and they were beating their chests, the Khulafa would see all of that, and it would remind them that if they are remembering the Yazid of yesterday, it's not too long before they're going to remember the Yazid of today, the oppressors of today. And so the Khulafa, they would do their best to squelch and to stop all of these commemorations from taking place. You know, when I was looking throughout the history of the Khalifs, if you want to see who had the greatest hatred for the commemoration of Imam Hussein, and of course it's a difficult comparison, right? Because when you look at the Khulafa, they all hated the Ahlul Bayt. They saw them as competitors. But if we were to look and we were trying to see who was it that had the greatest amount of hate, we might come across the name of Mutawakkil Abbasi. This is one of the Abbasid Khulafa. He actually, you know, these Abbasids, they came to power with the slogan of returning the Khilafah from the Umayyads back to the Ahlul Bayt. And of course, when they took that power, they held it on for themselves. But Mutawakkil, one of the things that he saw and one of the things that worried him was the amount of love that the people had for Imam Hussein. You know, one time, there was a gathering that Mutawakkil Abbasi he has, and in that gathering, there's one of the loyal companions of the Ahlul Bayt by the name of Ibn Sakit. Ibn Sakit, he's sitting there in that gathering. I don't know how they had pulled him into that gathering, but he was sitting there, and Mutawakkil asks him a question. He says, "Oh, Ibn Sakit, in your opinion, would you say that my two sons are more beloved, or the two sons of Amir al-Mu'mineen al-Hasan wal-Hussein?" And Ibn Sakit, when he hears this, he knows the danger that he's facing. He knows that if he gives the wrong answer, it's going to be off with his head. Despite this, he looks around and he sees that there's many people there. There's an audience, there's a gathering. He feels ashamed to say anything but the utter truth. And he turns towards Mutawakkil and he says, "Oh Mutawakkil, Ghambar, the servant of Amir al-Mu'mineen, he is more valuable in my eyes than both you and your two sons." When Mutawakkil hears this, he's enraged. And what ends up happening is that he has Ibn Sakit murdered in a very horrible way. Now, Mutawakkil is looking at this situation. He sees that even the people that have love for the Ahlul Bayt, they don't even have fear for him as the Khalif. And he says, what should I do to crush this love that the people have for Imam Hussein? What should I do? He eventually comes to the conclusion that he has to remove the love that the people have for the Imam from the source. And so he says, what is the source? Because he's been trying to remove it in terms of stopping the gatherings and all of this. He says, what is the source? He realizes that the best way to remove the love of Imam Hussein is to remove the shrine of Imam Hussein. And so he begins to look around. He says that who is willing to go and demolish the shrine of the Imam? And of course, during that time period, the shrine of the Imam, it was much smaller than today. Today we have a very large complex. During that era, it was a very small building that they had. And amongst all of the Muslims, and this is very amazing when I was looking at this, he couldn't find any from among the Muslims who were willing to demolish the shrine of the Imam. Ultimately, he finds a Jewish man who says, I don't have any love for Imam Hussein, I don't recognize him. And he says that I will do this demolishing that you are asking for, there's no issue. And he goes and he demolishes the shrine of the Imam. Now, you would think that once the shrine of the Imam is demolished, it is removed, this is going to do what? It's going to stop the people. They're not going to have anything where they can come and they can do ziyarah. The opposite happens. instead of it having a diminishing effect, even more people begin to come to the shrine of Imam Hussein, and they begin to do ziyarah where that shrine used to stand. Mutawakkil, he looks, he says, it didn't work, what do I do? He says that, well, I have to do something even further. He says that people can still see where the building used to stand. If I can remove at least the traces of where the building used to stand, then that's going to resolve the issue. Then people, they won't have anything that they can go and they can do ziyarah around. And he actually diverts water. He tries to erase all of the traces of where that shrine used to be. And despite this fact, people continue to come, and even more people continue to come to do the ziyarah of the shrine of Imam Hussein. Now, this reaches the point, and this is amazing. I was looking at a book by Shahid Mutari. It's called the Husseini Epic. It's in the Farsi language. I don't know if it's been translated into English. In this book, Shahid Mutari, he narrates that Mutawakkil, he had this group of entertainers. You know, today, alhamdulillah, when we want entertainment, we pay $9.99 or whatever the price is today. We get Netflix. We have all the entertainment that we want. During that time period, it wasn't like this. You had to have live entertainment. And the khulafa, all of them, they had singers, they had dancers, they had individuals whose job it was to entertain the audience. And so this group that Mutawakkil has, there is a leader who is supposed to teach the rest of them how to sing and how to dance and how to entertain the Khalif. The head of this group, one day Mutawakkil calls upon her. He says that I'm in need of this woman, please call her to come. They say that this woman has gone on a journey. We don't know where she's gone. And so Mutawakkil, he waits. A week goes by, 2 weeks goes by. Eventually this head singer, she returns back to the palace of the Khalif. He turns to her, he says that, where have you been? You know, with the khulafa, they're always thinking of plots and plans, and someone is out to get them and someone is out to get their power. And so he turns to this woman, he says that, where have you been? You've been gone for a few weeks. I needed you. She says that I had gone on the Hajj pilgrimage. He says, but it's not Dhul Hijjah, it's not the month of the Hajj. He's getting more and more suspicious. She says, well, I had gone on the Umrah pilgrimage. He says, but it's not the month of Rajab. It seems at that time, Rajab was the customary time where people would go on the Umrah pilgrimage. And so he begins to get really suspicious that you are within my palace, you are in charge of a very sensitive position, and then you disappeared for 2-3 weeks. Where were you? So Mutawakkil, he's questioning that, where have you gone? Where were you? And eventually she confesses that I had gone to do the ziyarah of Imam Hussein. Now, I want you to keep this in mind, that this woman is not a religious woman. Having this position as a singer and dancer in the palace of the Khalif, it's not a religious position that someone can have. But Mutawakkil, despite ruining the shrine of the Imam, demolishing the shrine, flooding the area, doing everything that he can in order to stop people from going on the ziyarah of the Imam, he finds that even with his own palace, people have been pulled towards the orbit of the Imam. And so this shows us that throughout history, no matter what the khulafa would do, there has always been this pull towards commemorating Abu Abdullah al-Hussein alayhi salam. Now, this leads us to the core of the question of tonight, and that is that when we are looking at why we are commemorating the month of Muharram and the events of Karbala, sometimes, when an outsider asks us this question, we get stuck. They ask us that, okay, well, 1400 years ago, we recognize the sacrifice of Imam Hussein. We recognize what the Imam did and the value of what he did. But 1400 years has passed since that time. We understand if, for example, immediately after Karbala, you commemorate. If 5 years, 10 years after Karbala, you commemorate. 20 years after Karbala, you commemorate. But it's been 1400 years that have passed, and still you are commemorating what happened at that time. What is the reason behind this? Inshallah, tonight and on the following nights, I wanted to go over a number of reasons of why we commemorate. When it comes to the first reason, when we are looking at who we are commemorating, we are commemorating the loss of a ma'soom. Now, people will say that, well, we understand the loss of a ma'soom, this is a great tragedy. But I think as Shias, sometimes we don't understand what the ma'soom really represents. From our perspective, when we are looking at the ma'soom, when we are looking at this individual who is an infallible, what we are really seeing, we are seeing an individual that is connected to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And we are seeing an individual that within themselves, they have the potential that whatever characteristics, whatever divine attributes Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has, this ma'soom has the maximal level of that characteristic and attribute which is possible for a human being. This is what we have to understand, that when you are looking at an imam, if Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is generous, and He is the most generous, then Imam Hussein alayhi salam and the Ma'soomeen, they had the maximal level of generosity which is possible for a human being. If you have other divine attributes, the Ma'soom has all of those things. Now, this is all fine and well. What does that mean for me and you today? When you lose an imam, when you lose a Ma'soom, what you are in reality losing is an individual with so much knowledge and so much ability to give us from those characteristics, from what they have. And when you lose an individual like that, when someone like that is murdered, that link is cut forever. So when we are looking at the loss of Imam Hussein alayhi salam, we are looking at the loss and of the potential that that Imam had in teaching humanity how to get closer to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. You know, there is a really beautiful story from the time of Amirul Mu'mineen. And this story, every time that I think about it, every time that I recite it, it breaks the heart. During the time of Amirul Mu'mineen, he had a companion by the name of Maytham at-Dammar. Maytham, he was one of the very close companions to the Imam. And Maytham, he narrates, he says that one night we had gathered with Amirul Mu'mineen in the city of Kufa. And when we had gathered in the city, there was a group of companions and we were learning from the Imam, and he was teaching us various things. When the night, it grew long, and many of the companions, they went to their houses. They went home. He says that I was the only one that was left. And the Imam, he says that, Maytham, come, let us take a walk into the desert. And Amirul Mu'mineen, he begins to walk into the desert until they reach a mosque which was known as the Ju'fi Mosque. When they reach the Ju'fi Mosque, Amirul Mu'mineen, he recites a 4-rakah prayer. He begins to pray. After the prayer is finished, he does dua. After that, he puts his head on the dirt and he begins to ask Allah for forgiveness. He begins to recite Al-Af a number of times. After he's finished, Amirul Mu'mineen, he gets up and he continues his journey with Maytham by his side into the darkness of the desert. Just imagine that you are walking with Amirul Mu'mineen into the desert. Eventually they reach a point and Amirul Mu'mineen, he stands in front of Maytham and he says, "Oh Maytham, I'm going to draw this line in the sand, and when I draw this line, you are to stand behind this line. I don't want to see you crossing it. You should remain here until I return back to you." Amirul Mu'mineen, he draws the line. He then continues on his way into the desert. Maytham, he begins to think to himself, Amirul Mu'mineen, he has many enemies. He has many individuals who want to assassinate him, who want to kill him. There's all of this danger that surrounds the Imam. What if something happens to Amirul Mu'mineen? What am I going to say in front of Rasulullah and Allah? What would I tell them on the Day of Judgment? That I just let the Imam walk into the desert and something happened to him? He says, I decided to cross the line and go after the Imam, even though he had told me to remain here. He says, I crossed the line, I began to walk into the desert. Eventually, after walking for a distance, I came across the shape of the Imam, the figure of the Imam. The Imam, he had his head stuck into a well, and he was saying something into the well, into the depths of that well. When he felt my presence, he turns, he says that, "Who is it?" I said, "It is I, Maytham." He says, "Oh Maytham, did I not tell you not to cross that line?" Then the Imam turns to Maytham. He says, "Oh Maytham, did you hear any of the words that I was speaking?" Maytham says, "Ya Amir al-Mu'mineen, I didn't hear anything that you said." Then the Imam, he mentions that whenever I feel this tightness in my chest, and the Imam, he had so much knowledge that he wanted to offer to humanity. There was so much that he wanted to teach us. He says that whenever I feel this tightness in my chest, and I can't bear it anymore, after the passing of Rasulullah, he didn't have anyone that he could speak to. He didn't have anyone that he could connect to at this level. He says that whenever I feel this tightness in my chest, and I want to get this off of my chest, I walk into the depths of the desert, I find a well, I find a hole in the ground, and I speak into the well, I speak into the earth. I want you to imagine how much knowledge the Ahlul Bayt had to give us. And yet they are unable, they don't have enough individuals who are at that rank and at that level that they could actually teach the things that they know. And so when we see this loss of a ma'soom, when you see the killing of Imam Hussein, when you look at even the killing of the rest of the Ahlul Bayt, what you are seeing is the loss of an individual that could connect you to Allah. And unfortunately, you see that others, they murder and they assassinate and they remove that individual from the earthly realm. This is reason number one why we mourn. Reason number two that we mourn is that Karbala is a reminder to every single individual that love of dunya can take you to the depths of the hellfire. If you look at the story of Karbala and you really study it very carefully, you see that the story of Karbala, it is intertwined very closely with the story of the love of dunya. In reality, these two things cannot be separated when you look at the story of Karbala. And when we look at the individuals that are involved, from Umar ibn Sa'ad to Ibn Ziyad to Yazid, before that even Muawiyah, you had all of these individuals that are complicit in creating Karbala. One of the things that you see in each and every one of their lives is that love of dunya. And I don't want you to make a mistake that oftentimes we would make. And I remember when I was younger, I would make the same mistake. That when I would read about Ibn Ziyad and Umar ibn Sa'ad and Yazid, I would think to myself that these are such evil individuals. They have nothing to do with me. There is no similarity at any level between who they were and who I am. And so we would vilify them and we would hate on them without realizing that there was a point in time when there was no difference between Yazid and us. There was a point in time when there was no difference between Umar ibn Sa'ad and us. There was a point in time that Ibn Ziyad, these individuals, we were the same when it came to who we were as human beings. But there was a point in time when Umar ibn Sa'ad and Yazid and Ibn Ziyad, maybe they did a small sin, a tiny sin. Maybe they said a little lie, for example. They committed maybe another small sin without thinking too much about it. And then from there, the door opens. That sin eventually leads to a bigger sin, and an even bigger sin, and an even larger sin. And that continues until that potential is created within them, where they can actually kill a ma'soom and they can feel pleasure at it. We have to keep in mind that shaitan, when he tricks us, he will never take us from 0 to 100 in a second. That's not how shaitan works. Shaitan will take us so gradually, so carefully, that many times we will not even realize what has happened until it's already too late. One of the individuals within the story of Karbala, he's a man by the name of Umar ibn Sa'ad. Umar ibn Sa'ad, when you look at his story, it's literally the story of love of dunya, love of the worldly life. Umar ibn Sa'ad, when we look at his history, he had a history where he was serving the Umayyads. And the reason why it appears he served the Umayyads is that he had great love for becoming the governor of a land which was known as Ray. Ray today, if any of you visit the city of Tehran, south of Tehran, there is an area which is known as Ray. And during that time period, it was very rich. It was an agricultural piece of land. And so it was a very wealthy piece of land that if you could become the governor of that land, then you had a lot of worldly status and power. And by the way, if you could become governor, during that time period, you essentially had the power of life and death over all of your subjects. If you wanted to jail someone, you could jail them. No one would question, why did you jail? If you wanted to kill someone, you could even kill them. If you wanted to take their wealth, you could take their wealth. You could do whatever you wanted to the people. Umar ibn Sa'd, he had great love for becoming the governor of this place called Ray. And what's interesting is that he begins to serve the Umayyads in order that eventually one day they can make him the governor of Ray. And so after many, many years of helping the Umayyads and serving the cause of the Umayyads, Ibn Ziyad, he calls Umar ibn Sa'd. He says, Umar, come, I want to speak to you. Umar ibn Sa'd, he comes to the court of Ibn Ziyad. Ibn Ziyad, he says that you have served the cause of the Umayyads now faithfully for many, many years. And it is time for you to have your reward. What is the reward? He says that here in my hand I have a paper. We are going to give you the governorship of the land of Ray. You are finally going to achieve what you have been working your entire life to achieve. And so he gives that piece of paper to Umar ibn Sa'd. He gives them 4,000 troops. With those 4,000 troops, Umar ibn Sa'd, he goes on the outskirts and he's camped and he's gathering, he's preparing in order to make that journey towards the land of Iran and to go to Ray. Right before he is able to leave to Ray, what happens? Ibn Ziyad calls him again. He says that I need something from you. Umar ibn Sa'd, he comes back to the court of Ibn Ziyad. He says, what is it? I was just about getting ready to leave. Ibn Ziyad, he says that Hussein ibn Ali, alongside a band of his followers, they are coming towards the city of Kufa and they are about to lead a rebellion. I need you to take your troops and I need you to go and fight against them and you're going to have to kill him. Umar ibn Sa'd, he says, look, you've already given me the land of Ray. Let me be on my way. Give this to someone else. I've served your cause for how many decades and years? Ibn Ziyad, he says, not a problem. You don't have to do what I'm asking you. It's a choice. But what I want is that if you don't want to do it, you simply give me back that piece of paper. You're not going to be the governor of the land of Ray. Umar ibn Sa'd, he goes. He says, give me some time. I need to think about this. He goes, he thinks, he consults. He does everything that he can, trying to find a way out of the situation. And eventually he comes to the conclusion that if he wants the land of Ray, he has no choice but to do what Ibn Ziyad has asked him to do. Now, what's amazing is that Umar ibn Sa'd, he himself says, just imagine where love of dunya can take an individual. He says, by Allah, I cannot understand two important things about which I am extremely worried and bewildered about. There is some situation that Umar ibn Sa'd is really struggling with. He says that should I leave the governorship of Ray or should I commit the crime of killing Hussein? And then he says something which should shock every single individual in this room. He says, by Allah, I know that his killer will be doomed to hell and that nothing will be able to save him. But what can I do? For the governorship of Ray is the apple of my eye. Allahu Akbar. In the very beginning, Umar ibn Sa'd, he wasn't like this. Yes, he had love for dunya. Yes, that seed was there, but he cultivated it. As he grew older, he watered it. And that seed of love of dunya, it grows and it grows and it grows until it takes over his heart and it takes over his mind, until he reaches the point that he knows that if I kill Imam al-Hussein, I will end in the fire of hell. But he says, I can't stop myself. My brothers and sisters, there is no difference intrinsically as human beings between us and these figures that we read about. And so when we commemorate and when we shed tears, one of the questions that we should be asking ourselves is the question that, do I have this love of dunya in my heart? And by the way, for each person, it can be something different. For some, it can be money. For others, it can be social status. Every single individual, they have a slightly different take on what they love. But if we have that seed of love of dunya, it is possible for us to eventually reach the point where these individuals in the story of Karbala reached. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala protect us and may He guide us And may He allow this month of Muharram to be a month of reflection and a month of growth for all of us, inshallah. Sallu ala Muhammad.